in the ancient city of Providence. Edgar Allan Poe often visited the mansion house in Benefit Street during his unsuccessful wooing of poetess Mrs. Whitman. Poe's favorite walk led him past a particular house on the eastern side of the street, which was a symbol of all that is hideous. The house, originally a farm or semi-farm building, had a peculiar fascination for Poe, but he never wrote or spoke of it. The house was built over a century and a half ago and followed the average New England colonial lines. It faced south, with one gable end buried in the eastward rising hill, and the other exposed to the foundations toward the street. The farm-like grounds extended back very deeply up the hill. People died in the house in alarmingly great numbers, and it was considered unhealthy due to the dampness, fungus growth in the cellar, and general sickish smell. The house was never regarded as haunted, but it was said to be unlucky. After some peculiar happenings, the building became deserted, and neighboring houses seemed entirely free from the noxious quality. As a child, the narrator knew the Shunned House was vacant, with barren trees, queerly pale grass, and misshapen weeds in the high terraced yard. The narrator and his friends used to explore the place, feeling a youthful terror at the morbid strangeness of the vegetation and the eldritch atmosphere of the dilapidated house. The small-paned windows were largely broken, and a nameless air of desolation hung round the precarious paneling. The dust and cobwebs added their touch of the fearful, and brave indeed was the boy who would voluntarily ascend the ladder to the attic. But the attic was not the most terrible part of the house. It was the dank, humid cellar that exerted the strongest repulsion. In a creepy old house on Benefit Street, strange fungi grew, resembling toadstools and Indian pipes. They rotted quickly and glowed in the dark, making people think of witch fires. My uncle, Dr. Whipple, a sane and conservative physician, collected notes and data about the house, but didn't share them with me until I was older. He believed the house was simply unsanitary, but I thought it was haunted. Dr. Whipple lived in a Georgian homestead with his manservant, surrounded by relics and records of his ancient family. The Shunned House was nearby, and its history was full of horror and malevolence. William Harris and his wife, Roby, built the house in 1763, but their family was plagued by tragedy. Their children died young, and Roby became insane after her husband's death. Her sister Mercy took care of the family, but her health declined. The house seemed cursed, and my uncle's research only added to the mystery. In 1768, Mehetable, a servant, died, and another servant, Preserved Smith, left without explanation. Mercy, the owner, struggled to find new help due to the 7 deaths and one case of madness that occurred within 5 years. She eventually hired Ann White from North Kingstown and Zena's Lowe from Boston. Anne spread sinister rumors, and Mercy replaced her with Maria Robbins from Newport. Roby Harris, who was mad, would scream and utter horrors, forcing her son to live with his cousin, Peleg Harris. When Zenas died, Roby laughed with delight and she soon passed away. Her son, William, joined the Army of Observation and later married Phoebe Hetfield. They had a stillborn daughter, and Mercy Dexter died in 1782. William realized the house was unhealthy and moved out, but his cousin Rathbone Harris rented it despite the deaths and illnesses. The house remained a nuisance until Carrington Harris decided to renovate it and rent it out. Anne White told a spooky tale about a vampire buried under a house, which sparked my interest. I linked her story to other strange events: a servant complaining of something sucking his breath at night, death certificates showing victims with no blood, and a woman's ravings about a glassy-eyed presence. Newspaper clippings from 1815 and 1845 described deaths where the victims became violent and tried to bite their doctors. In 1860, a series of anemia deaths occurred, with patients babbling in French, a language they didn't know. My uncle, a doctor, collected data on the house and shared it with me. I investigated further, talking to the house's owners, the Harris family, and researching town records. I discovered that the land was originally owned by John Throckmorton and was later subdivided. A rumor said it was a graveyard, but I found that the graves were moved to another location. Then I stumbled upon a 1697 lease record for a small tract of land to Etienne Roulet and his wife, introducing a French element to the mystery. I studied the area's layout and found that the Roulets had a graveyard behind their cottage, which is now the site of the Shunned House. I was determined to explore the cellar of the house to uncover more secrets. In 1686, Huguenot Etienne Roulet and his family settled in Providence after facing opposition in East Greenwich. Etienne, an avid reader and drawer of strange diagrams, got a clerical post at Pardon Tillinghaste's wharf. However, his son Paul's erratic behavior led to a riot, and the family vanished. The legend of the Roulets persisted, with whispers of Paul's unusual prayers and the French ravings of Roby Harris. I discovered a dark connection to Jacques Roulet, a demoniac condemned to death in 1598. I visited the Shunned House, searching for clues, and eventually, with Carrington Harris's permission, fitted a key to the disused door. My uncle suggested I investigate at night, and on a stormy midnight, I saw a huddled form amidst the mold. My uncle and I decided to test the horror of the house with a joint night vigil, setting up scientific equipment in the cellar. We planned to watch singly till dawn, but what happened next would change everything. My uncle and I believed in the possibility of unknown forces existing in our world, influenced by the French settlers of 2 centuries ago. We suspected that the Roulet family, particularly Paul Roulet, had an affinity for dark entities, which continued to function after their deaths. This force could be an alien substance or energy, hostile or self-preserving, and our duty was to eliminate it. We prepared 2 weapons, a Crookes tube to combat intangible forces and flamethrowers for material entities. We set up our equipment in the cellar, carefully positioning it around the cot and chairs. Our vigil began at 10 p.m., but we saw no signs of the entity. The cellar was damp and eerie, with fungi and rotting furniture. As we waited, my uncle grew drowsy, and I reminded him to take a 2-hour sleep. I sat alone, feeling a chill of fear. The rain outside and the sound of dripping water inside made the atmosphere oppressive. I studied the walls, occasionally looking out into the street for comfort. My uncle stirred in his sleep, breathing irregularly and sighing. I shone my flashlight on him and saw his face averted. When I checked again, I was unnerved by what I saw, although it was relatively trivial. My uncle, Elihu Whipple, was troubled by strange dreams due to our unusual situation. His expression changed, showing a mix of emotions, which unsettled me. He started muttering in French, recalling dark myths from an antiquarian magazine. Suddenly, he woke up, shouting, my breath," and told me a dream that left me in awe. In his dream, he saw a world that was familiar yet strange, with distorted pictures and unclear faces, including those of the Harris family. He felt a personal sensation of choking, as if an unknown presence was taking over his body. I tried to convince myself it was just a dream, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease. Later, I fell asleep and had my own disturbing dreams, feeling confined and threatened by hostile forces. When I woke up, I saw a faint, yellowish light that cast an eerie shadow. I heard a scream and smelled a terrible stench. My uncle was in danger, and I prepared to defend him against an unknown menace. What I saw was worse than my worst fears. A monstrous, half-human figure emerged from the fungus-ridden earth, its eyes wolfish and mocking. My uncle, Elihu Whipple, was transformed, his features decaying, as he reached out to attack me. Thanks to my training, I managed to stay calm and used the Crookes tube apparatus to focus ether radiations on the horror, weakening its power. In a dimly lit room, I witnessed a horrific scene. My uncle's body began to liquefy, his face changing into multiple identities, including those of the Harris family and others. I saw features of both men and women, adults and infants, familiar and unfamiliar faces. The shifting features fought against each other, trying to form my uncle's kind face. I fled the room, leaving behind a trail of greenish grease. I walked aimlessly, trying to process what I had seen. Eventually, I returned to the house, determined to uncover the source of the horror. I found no signs of my uncle's body, but I knew I had to dig deeper. I ordered a pickaxe, spade, gas mask, and sulfuric acid, and began digging in the cellar. As I dug, the smell grew worse, and I uncovered a fishy, glassy substance with a form like a giant stovepipe. I poured the acid down the hole, and a blinding maelstrom of greenish-yellow vapor surged up. The roar was deafening, but eventually the vapors subsided, and I was able to fill in the hole. As I buried the last remains of a monstrous creature, I wept for my dear uncle's memory. The following spring, the once haunted house's garden transformed, and Carrington Harris moved in. Although the house still feels eerie, its mystery draws me in. I'll feel a pang of sadness when it's eventually demolished to make way for a new development. But for now, the old trees have started producing sweet apples, and birds have made their homes in their twisted branches.